again, YouTube. If you haven't seen my videos before, I'm Ross the Oliver Man. And today, I thought we'd do a little background history on my 1855 here. It's, I've been trying to make videos maybe on each of the tractors and how I got them. But the 1855 was the first tractor that I bought after I got done with college. And I don't think a lot of people in my family really wanted me to go into farming, but I knew that I did. So as soon as I got done, I set about finding a bigger horse to try to make things easier. Because for years we farmed with just a 1650 and a 1655. So I bought this from a local auctioneer who had it parked at the end of his driveway, and I will put a picture in, and it was in rough shape. And how he came about to get it is he had I want to say it was a 2105 white that was in really nice shape he had for sale, and he traded with a guy in Kentucky, and this tractor came up here. And if you look at those pictures again, how it was when I got it, it was just totally ragged out. I mean, it had bald 34-inch tires on it off of a 50 series tractor. So you can tell the guy probably had good tires on this tractor, and he swapped them to something else before he traded this. And the tractor did run, but it did not sound very good. And after you would run it for, I don't know, an hour, you could just about watch the oil pressure drop the longer you used it. And anyway, I still wanted it because it was a 100 horsepower size Oliver, and that's what I was looking for. So having just got back from college, I had about zero money, and so I scraped together everything I had, basically like graduation gift money and other little bit, and ended up buying it. And so I probably used it for a year like it was. And actually it was getting bad enough that I'm amazed I didn't blow it up. But I would use it for an hour or so and then let it sit and go get something else and use it and then go back to this. And I got by with it that first year. And then ended up taking it to the shop where I later ended up working, that was the AGCO dealer in town. And I did the work myself, kind of with using their facility, and, you know, extra pair of hands when I needed it was nice, because there are jobs where it's handier when you've got another person to help you. So we did it in there, and they were nice enough to give me like store credit on parts and stuff, because I still didn't really have that much money. So we got it going and brought it back home and put it to work. When I got it, it did not have fender tanks on it, as you can see in those pictures. It had regular fenders. And by some stroke of luck, another AGCO dealer called me and he said, "Do you know of anybody who's got regular fenders for sale for a 17, 18, 1955? And I said, well, I've got a set on an 1855. And he said, well, the guy's got fuel fenders and he's building a pulling tractor. And I said, you know, kind of jokingly, I said, well, I'd trade him my regular fenders for fuel fenders. And he said, well, we'll be there after a while. So the guy and him loaded up, and we traded regular fenders for fuel fenders. And I was tickled to death because I've always loved the fuel fenders. So that's how I acquired these, and that's also why they have 50 series lights in them. But that's okay. I kind of like that. Different. I know I've talked about this before at different times, but just a few years ago, I finally got the correct wheel centers for this tractor. Like I said, when I bought it, it had 34s off of a 50 series tractor with the solid wheel center. And that always bothered me. Nobody else seemed to really understand why I didn't like that, but I knew that that's not what it was supposed to have. So I found this set of 38s with tires already mounted on them. And I'm not really a fan of these long bar, short bar tires, but that was on it, and I'm not going to replace them till I have to. So we'll go with this for a while. But I really like the way it makes the tractor stand and scoot down the road. So that is a good thing. One of the things I did to the tractor when I first got it was put these dual hubs on here. And I don't remember where I had them shipped in from, but I want to say I gave like $300 for the pair of those. And I've had them on there. Well, then I found out that with the way the old wheels were spaced, I could not use the duals without having a spacer on here. And this spacer was about impossible to find. So I'll tell you a little story, I guess, about that too. I know this is turning into a lot of me talking, but I finally found a set of these spacers after searching over what felt like the entire earth and not producing any. I found them at a local auction, of all places. And if you don't know anything about these spacers, there are two lengths. There are these, which I think are 9.5, maybe 8.5. I don't remember off the top of my head. The other ones are like 11.5. They're a lot longer. And they were made where you could like on the 50 series tractors, just use the long spacer to put duals on. Use a regular hub. But anyway, I needed these short ones. They were hard to find. So out of a whim, there was an auction listed in our local paper. And I thought, I'm going to go to this auction because the guy that is having the auction had farmed with Olivers. He didn't have any farm stuff listed on his sale. It was mainly like household and that type of stuff. But I thought, just in case, I'm going to go. Well, that turned out to be, I think, the best auction I've ever been to in my life, because there was Oliver parts there that just you could not believe. And what it amounted to is, I think on the auction, they sold a couple of the Cessna cylinders, hydraulic cylinders, like what would have come with a 55 series tractor. And I bought those. I think I gave $20 a piece for them. He had probably 4 or 5 flat weights for the front that were in a dairy trough. And they sold those on the sale, and I think I gave $40 a piece for those. They had these that I needed and a set of duals. The auctioneer wanted to sell them as a pair, and I said, I don't need the tires. Some people might just need the spacers. So he finally agreed to sell the spacers separate. I gave $35 for the pair of spacers. So already I was just tickled to death about this auction. And they went on and were selling other stuff and moved on to the household stuff. And I was kind of wandering around there, and I looked in the one barn, and there was a whole bunch of Oliver parts in there, and they hadn't pulled out or anything to sell. And so I went and asked the auctioneer, and he said, I don't think anybody wants that junk. So he said, I didn't even bother to pull it out. So he said, if you're interested, he said, go find the owner's son. He said, he's around here. So I went and I piled a bunch of stuff together, and I'm talking about good stuff, like the hydraulic cover for the other side of this tractor was in the pile. There was 3 or 4 factory steps in the pile. There was sway blocks. There was a whole nother pile of flat weights, like 6 or 7 flat weights. There was a factory umbrella hanging that it was in kind of rough shape. The guy ended up giving it to me, but just all kinds of good stuff that you hardly, ever find. And when you do, you got to really pay for it. And I piled it all together and went and got this owner's son. And I said, would you be interested in selling me this stuff? And he looked at me and he said, you want to buy this junk? And I said, yeah, I do. And he said, would you give me $100 for it? And I said, yeah, I will. So I gave him $100, and he was tickled to death, and I got a whole pile of parts. I think I went to the sale that day, and my total bill was probably $300 or so with what I'd spent on the sale and with the $100 I gave him. And I left with my pickup rounded to the cab with Oliver parts. So those are the things you dream about and will probably never happen again in my lifetime. But that was a good day. I got a lot of stuff that I've used on my tractors over the years now, and you know, it's not just going to waste or in the dumpster, because they obviously didn't have any use for it. So it's a good day when everybody's happy and, you know, everybody gets what they want, I guess. I want to say that when I overhauled this, it had 74 hours on it or so. So even in all these years, I've only put about 1,000 hours on it. But when you got 30-some tractors, you don't run up a lot of hours on any one. So, but this is probably one of my favorite go-to tractors. And people always ask, what's your favorite? Well, that's hard to say, but this one would be in the top 5 of ones that would be the last ones to leave if I had to sell them all. I just really like this tractor. It's also kind of unusual in the fact that it still has a non-cooler block that didn't explode. And you can see somebody before me has put this aftermarket oil cooler on that changes it to a spin-on filter, and that's kind of nice. It gives you a little bit of cooling, and it doesn't look ridiculous, really. It's not, you know, out of the ordinary. Only a die-hard Oliver person would probably realize that wasn't supposed to be on there. So in case you're still unclear about factory oil cooler blocks on 310 Waukesha's, here's the 1955. You can see the cooler tucked in there in between the frame. It's actually cast into the block, a place for this to bolt, and then it's got 2 lines that run up and get your water circulating. Still uses the canister sock filter, and you know, having a cooler on a turbocharged engine is just a good idea. And they should have done this to all of them, and I don't think they would have got as bad a reputation. The 19 size tractors also had this extra oil filter on them. And I don't know if it was an option. I've seen it on almost all of them, so I would say that was pretty well a standard thing. But the 1950T had them tucked up under here. But on these tractors, you don't quite have that room, so they bolted it over here to the side. But this is another project that I keep saying I'm going to get to, and I never can seem to get it started. So one of these days, I'll get back on it and at least get it tore apart and make a video of that, so we can take inventory of what we need and start getting it back ready to go to the field. The 55 series came out in 1969, and for the most part was an updated version of the 50 series, but the biggest changes came in the 17, 18, and 1955, because while your engine was still a Waukesha, like the 1750 had, you know, or the 1950T, this tractor, the hydraulic system was largely updated, and it was now a closed center hydraulic system, which, if you don't know anything about that, basically it could lift, I would say, at idle what you would have to rev the other open center up to pick up in some circumstances. So this is a much nicer hydraulic system. And with the addition of that, you also got hydraulic brakes, which was a new thing for them. And you got a hydraulic PTO, which is really nice. You've got your little valve here. And another thing that I guess is nice for the safety standpoint is when you turn it on, you know, it's while the tractor's running, but when you shut the tractor off and the pressure goes away, it goes back to off. So that way you have less chance of getting somebody caught up in it when you're starting it up. This hydraulic system also allowed you the ability to put up to 4 remotes on the tractor. You see the quadrant on this one has 2 extra slots, but you could basically just keep stacking valves on here, and they made different levers that were clocked a little different and longer to get to the back 2 slots. So that was something that probably was still ahead of its time, because a tractor of this size really couldn't pull a whole bunch of implements in a line. So having 2 remotes was probably more than plenty in a lot of situations at the time. Now today, obviously there's more applications where we use more than 2 remotes quite often, but back then 2 was pretty well the standard thing. I have seen one 55 series tractor in this area that came out with just 1, and I thought that was unusual for somebody to only order 1 at the time. And you could get different types of valves. These are pressure detent valves, meaning that whenever, you know, it reaches like the dead stroke of the cylinder, it will pop back to neutral on its own. And you could also get float valve for it. The 1755's actually got one of those on it. And so it gave you some choices of different setups depending on what you wanted to do with the tractor. Even with all of the hydraulic changes, essentially underneath it's the same tractor as before. The transmission, very similar to the earlier ones. The difference in power plant for the 55 series large frames was now, instead of having different motor suppliers for the different sizes, such as 1750 having a Waukesha, and then 1850 had a Perkins, 1950 had a GM, and later went to a turbocharged Waukesha. All of the 17, 18, 1955 were 310 cubic inch Waukesha motors, and your 1755 is naturally aspirated and no oil cooler on the block. The 1855 had a turbo added and no oil cooler on the block, which later proved to be the demise of a lot of these, I think. And then the 1955 had a turbo with an oil cooler, and of course each step you went up, they turned up the injection pump just a little bit. There's other tractor brands that did the same thing, used the same motor, and the only difference in the tractor was turning the screw on a lot of them. So, you know, a lot of the Alice Chalmers 7000 series tractors were the same motor, just turned up for the different sizes. So if you had a 7010 and you wanted a 7050, just turn the screw till you get there, you know. So it was the same way with this, but the 310 was really being pushed to its limit, I think, in the you know, when you get to the like the 1955 size. That was pretty well, I think, its limit on what it could safely handle with the way it was made in casting. It's really not that heavy of a casted block. You could probably add some more webbing and stuff, would have made it a more durable engine, because even though you can't see it by eye, when stuff is running and pulling, stuff is moving, even though it's at a level that you probably can't tell, but metal is flexing and things, and that's probably another reason that these got such a bad reputation for chucking out something out of the side of the block. It's also interesting that, you know, you see on Facebook guys who have tractors that have thrown a rod, and if you have to have it throw a rod, it would be better if it happened on this side, because you could patch the hole and go again. But if it does on the other side, you're going to have a problem, because on this side of the block, you have the main oil gallery cast into the block, and if it chucks a rod through here, you're never going to get that welded up enough that it's going to hold oil pressure. I mean, you would have to really, really work to get that done, and at that point it would be worth just replacing with a different block. But I have seen many blocks on Oliver tractors that have holes in them on the opposite side, and they have been patched. I think my 77, actually, if I remember right, has a patch on it, and all that guy did was put like a tin coffee can and folded it over on itself, and then drilled and tapped a bunch of screws and made a plate over the hole. So, you know, it can be done, but if you can save the cast iron pieces, that would be your best bet to try to weld back in if you were going to try to save the block. Now, what made me think about telling this story now was that just the other day, I saw a guy post something on Facebook that reminded me of where this tractor had come from. And what that amounts to is, I guess, before I get ahead of myself, when I bought the tractor, I ordered the build card, and it showed that it was shipped to Avalon, Wisconsin. And I thought, okay, that's something. This was the first tractor I'd ever bought that you could get a build card for, and that wasn't from around this area. So I was kind of curious, and back then I looked up on the internet and tried to find evidence of who the dealer was in Avalon, Wisconsin, and, you know, couldn't find any leads on that. Well, several years later, I ended up with a box full of old farm magazines like the Farm Journal and Successful Farming and stuff from the 60s, 70s, 50s, all that. And I was looking through them one time, and in the back of one, in the classified ad section, there was an ad for the Badger Farm Store in Avalon, Wisconsin. And it said, I think, hundreds of 1655, 1755, 1855, 1955 tractors, low hours, you know, all this, and see the Turk before you buy. And I thought, well, that's an interesting ad, and that has to be where the tractor came from, because Avalon, Wisconsin, that's not just a town that I think would have had more than one dealer. So I eventually put on Facebook if anybody had any information about this, and I did get a little bit of information, and I'll tell you what I found out then, and that is the Turk was actually a guy from Turkey, and they just called him Turk as his nickname. His real name, according to what I found out, and I'm probably butchering this, was something like Orhan Yermabik. And I guess this guy was buying tractors by the rail car load from Oliver, and he would pay cash. So he didn't have to share inventory with other dealers whenever they needed a tractor, you know, because he had paid for them already. And also because he was buying so many, he got a great price, so he could sell things cheaper. And supposedly he got a lot of tractors sold to like vegetable farms and things like that, like Green Giant and different food companies like that. So anyway, everybody that I have talked to that knows about this guy said he was just a great guy, and they loved to deal with him. He was honest. He was friendly. There was a story I heard about how an 18-year-old kid was trying to get into farming, and no banks would give him a loan, but the Turk gave him an 880 and a plow and said, pay me when you can, and, you know, no collateral, didn't worry about it. And he would also do stuff like after the canners and the places that he'd sold the tractors to, after they wanted new tractors, he'd buy the old tractors back and then ended up selling them as used tractors. And I've heard people say that, you know, if the canners did a lot of service work to one particular tractor, he would make sure the customer knew that that tractor had a lot of troubles in its life, and he would usually give them a pretty good deal because he didn't want anything, you know, bad to happen to his customers. So I would like to know more, and what made me think of this, like I said the other day, was somebody on Facebook finally produced a picture of the dealer sticker from the Badger Farm Store in Avalon, Wisconsin, and at the bottom of the sticker it said, see the Turk before you buy, and I thought that was neat. And I would like to hear in the comments or whatever any more stories you've got about this dealership. I'd love to see pictures if anybody knows that there's pictures of this outfit, because it sounds like he did quite the high volume. And I don't know if he's still alive or not. If he is, I'd love to hear from him. If you're out there, Turk, I'd like to hear from you. Last I heard, somebody said he'd retired to Arizona, but he'd have to be a pretty old guy by now, I would think. I mean, but anyway, if you know any more about that story of that dealership, I would love to hear about it, because that's part of what I really enjoy about collecting these tractors, is all the different stories that you get from them and where they've all been. I've always thought it'd be neat, you know, if this tractor could talk and tell me how it ended up from Wisconsin down in Kentucky, and then it ended up here, and now it lives with me. So it's covered some miles in its day, and must have been fairly well taken care of for a lot of its life to only have, it had like 4,200 hours, I think I said, and it didn't blow up the original motor, and that's unusual. So, you know, this one wasn't really rode hard like some of them. It looked terrible when I got it, but I think a lot of that was just from probably not have seen a shed for a long time. But if you know anything about that dealer, like I said, go ahead and make a comment or something, because I think it'd be neat to see pictures of it back in its heyday. Well, as always, I hope you enjoyed my videos. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.